Okay, next question. I meet with a client and sign a listing agreement for their house to go on the market in 2 weeks' time. But after signing the agreement before the list date set out in the contract, the client enters into a purchase agreement to sell the home without my involvement. Does the listing agreement we signed give me any right to commission, even though the purchase agreement was entered into before the list date specified in the agreement? Is there any way I can write something into the listing agreement to protect myself in this scenario?
I suspect that this issue came up because I could tell the calls started coming in for that once we made the latest forms changes in January. We removed the date line at the top of the listing contract. The reason we removed it is because it was causing confusion, and it seems as though the removal is causing confusion too. But the date in the contract, it's always been this way. It says it shall become effective on blank. That is the effective date of the contract, and that's when your listing starts. You do not have commission protection anytime before that date. And you didn't have, even before we changed the form. I don't know if maybe that's what people thought, if you put July 1st at the top and then it wasn't going to be effective until July 15th. Maybe there was misunderstanding that there was some protection there for those 2 weeks, but there is not protection for your commission until that listing date starts. And then can you write something into the listing agreement to protect yourself? Just list it for the date. Whatever date you put on there is when your listing starts. So I guess what you want to do is try to cut down on, if they want 2 weeks to get the house ready, either ask them to list it right then, or you come back in 2 weeks when they're ready and list it then. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, that's a tough one because a lot of folks need a little bit of time to get their house ready, and you want to make sure they feel obligated to you to sign something and to move on. Now, most of the time what we experience is people feel loyalty to you. If they sign an agreement with you, even though it's not effective for 2 weeks, they're generally going to come to you if someone comes to buy the house. That they don't have to, and legally they don't have to pay you anything.
Again, that's where confusion was. If your MLS has rules about how many days you have to get your listing in, again, it goes by that effective date on the contract.
Good point, thank you. The next one I have, it's really not a question, it just says lawsuits regarding MLS commissions. I trust you've had a chance to think about that?
Well, the one that comes to mind, of course, is the recent NAR lawsuit. Is everyone familiar with NAR and Realogy and Home Services and Remax and Keller Williams have all been sued in a lawsuit in Illinois back in March. It's an antitrust lawsuit. They're saying that the commission sharing aspect of the MLS is conspiracy and it creates antitrust violations. The plaintiffs are saying, this is not me saying, the seller pays inflated commissions due to paying buyer broker commissions, and that's anti-competitive. This is a very, very new lawsuit. As Frank knows, lawsuits take forever. This will probably be 10 years, 7 to 10 years before any kind of a resolution. Katie Johnson, who I've spoken to, is very adamant that there is no liability. They will win, but it will take years. So that's the one lawsuit out there right now dealing with commissions, the MLS, whether the MLS is anti-competitive.
Is Katie Johnson NAR's realtor?
Sorry, not yet NAR's.
Clarification, Katie Johnson's realtor for NAR, so thank you.
General counsel.
Oh, general counsel, I'm sorry, okay. Can a seller demand funds in addition to earnest money for a mutual release?
Yes, they can. As a matter of fact, a lot of folks feel like the only damages are the earnest money, and that's not true. If a buyer backs out for an illegitimate reason, the seller obviously can stake claim to that earnest money. They can also try to recover the difference in the cost of the sale of the house down the road. So for example, if they had a $160,000 purchase agreement, buyer backed out, they had to sell the house down the road for $140,000. they can try to recoup that money from that buyer that backed out. Again, for no legal reason. If there's a legal reason to back out, they wouldn't have that claim.
Can an agent relist a home as active prior to a mutual release being signed?
But this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Legally, no. Either the mutual release has to be signed or the contract has to have terminated by way of expiration, most likely, before it can be resold. And this says as active. That implies an MLS category, I think. So that's going to depend on MLSs have different categories. All the different MLSs do. I think. And can you tell me what you have? Do you have an active pending?
We've got active pending. We've got a contingent status that has a lot of subcategories like accepting backup offers, waiting for third-party approval.
Does that contingent status have a waiting for termination or
I don't
mutual
think
release?
so. I don't recognize that one.
So you're just going to be pending. You're still pending until it's terminated. In addition to that, you have to have, according to the Code of Ethics, you have to disclose the fact that there's still an accepted offer on the property. So yeah, in your case, there would be no way just to go active without disclosing that other offer. It's still pending.
Good to know. Possession and sellers not wanting to pay and just leaving, and the agent's not explaining the seller owes if they use the days or not. It's kind of a statement, not a question, but I think you get the.
Yeah, this is something that's been in these forms for years, and I think people didn't realize it for a long time, but the actual wording of the purchase agreement under possession section says, for each day seller is entitled to possession after closing, seller shall pay the buyer at closing blank US dollars per day. So we have two key words in there, I think. For each day seller is entitled and seller shall pay. This isn't an option. This isn't, well, seller's asking for 15 days after closing, and if they use it, they'll pay you. This is, seller is reserving the house for 15 days after they close. And for that, they're gonna pay X amount of dollars per day. So that should come out at closing. They negotiated in there that they're gonna pay for that time to stay. Even if it changes, it would have to be an agreement between the parties. You know, if they end up saying, oh, it turns out we are gonna be out on the day of closing, they were entitled to those days, so they still have to pay for them, unless for some reason buyer wants to let them off the hook and say we won't charge you after all. So.
Would you suggest putting that in writing if the buyer
Definitely.
lets them off the hook?
Yeah, that would be an amendment to the purchase agreement.
Okay, thank you. Lenders changing the amount down and the financing type without modification of the offer.
I think we actually covered that already. You do need to modify the offer. You should modify the offer. I think if it's something really minor, like you're going from a 30 to a 15, it's, a lot of folks may not think of modifying the contract for that. Again, you're not going to be able to back out of the contract as a seller, even if you want to, for something minor like that. So it all relates again to the prejudice, any problems that it causes the seller. If it's going to go beyond the original timelines in the contract, then obviously you need to modify that, or you'll be out of contract and the party will be able to walk.